Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to take sort of a market level approach to looking at kids games and understanding what the growth looks like in the future and what we expect in terms of monetization models and how they will evolve. So before I get started, just to introduce what I do and what my company does. As she mentioned, I am the Director of Research and Consumer Insights at Superdata. So at Superdata, what we do is we gather transaction level data in order to understand spending patterns, market patterns, and so on. But what my job is to basically explain a lot of that data and to also supplement any data that we need qualitative research for. So a lot of, this will largely be a data-focused presentation, but a lot of times, we present survey studies or interviews and things like that, just to round out those trends. So at Superdata, we're 15 people strong. We cover all digital game segments and playable media, so it spans across MMOs, mobile games, social, console, PC, gaming video content, esports, VR, anything games related that's got a digital aspect to it, we cover it. And so, as I mentioned, we use point-of-sale data from our partners, which are publishers, developers, and payment service providers who anonymously donate their data in return for our research. And that allows us to understand the monthly spending of 37 million paying unique digital gamers worldwide. And so our research combines this transaction level data and qualitative consumer insight, as I mentioned. And finally, we are continuously evolving our research catalog. So Kids Mobile has always been, somewhat present in our mobile research, but it's starting to emerge as something really big for us. So we always try to cover the most relevant topics and do it in the most accurate way possible. And so our customer base spans the industry, everyone from legacy publishers, digital-only publishers, media companies, industry service providers, anybody involved in games. We have worked with, many of those companies. So in order to sort of understand how these trends that we're starting to see in the kids mobile market are coming to light, I think it's important to contextualize that with a landscape. First, understanding the mobile market as a whole. So the worldwide mobile market is $24.1 billion. By the end of this year, it'll reach $24.1 billion. And while Asia is an enormous part of that, North America is still going strong. Of course, there's some slow in growth, but it's almost $5 billion this year, and we still continue to see different segments of mobile grow, such as kids mobile games. And so when looking at kids mobile games, first I want to define sort of what we mean by kids mobile market. So we mean the amount of revenue that is obtained through kids purchases. This does not mean kids specific apps necessarily. I'll break some of that down a little bit more so you can see that more granularly, but we are talking about $1.9 billion of revenue that's acquired through kids, through all games. And this is almost 8% of the worldwide mobile market. When we look at the US, we see a larger market share in the kids mobile, for kids mobile versus the total mobile market at $417 million. So that's over 9% of the US mobile market. So we see that kids games are fueled by developed markets like the US. And so overall share is going to be lower in developing markets than in these developed markets. But we expect in maturing markets to see slow growth, slow and steady growth in the kids realm. So we do expect that market share to expand. And so one thing that's really important and difficult to navigate is the marketing in a saturated environment like the US mobile market. And so we've seen cost per installs in the mobile market rise continuously at a much faster rate than we see average revenue per user. So this is the indexed trend lines for both of those metrics. And so what's really important is going to be your targeting. It's going to be how you appeal to gamers and their parents in particular. So if we consider different age groups and how those age groups are informed and how their choices of games are informed, younger audiences 0 to 5 tend to generally play what their parents want them to play. At that point in time in your life, you're generally playing with what your parents are buying you. So that's where parent marketing is crucial. The 6 to 9 range, you see a general consensus between parents and children, but parents still have a large hand in what children are playing. And then the tween and preteen market is just whatever their friends are playing, what's cool, and maybe the parents don't get it. But we see a lot of this demographic skewing toward more generalized games that are not necessarily kid-specific. They do play both, but we're starting to see more and more growth in that general gaming market. And so at that age especially, kids have more agency when making in-app purchases. So Dubit, a research company that focuses on children, they put out a metric that 41% of kids know their parents' password, but about 90% of those kids will ask permission to make purchases. But the point being that kids will actively try to get all of the tools that they can to make these purchases, but in the end, their parents are the last line of defense. As they get older, those sorts of spendings increase, and so they're able to make more in-app purchases over time. So when marketing a game, oftentimes you're marketing to the parents and then indirectly at the kids, but parents and kids want different things. So we did a study, and this is our qualitative research, where we looked at kids 8 to 11 years old in the US to understand what their game quality preferences were and what their game genre preferences were. And overwhelmingly, we saw that kids don't care about education in their mobile games. 8 to 11-year-olds, they just want to play something fun. So they want outlets for creativity, they want something that engages them, and whether or not it has certain branding or visual features tends to be less important, but education, by and large, is almost completely unimportant to those to children. However, to parents, that's not the case, right? So parents want to see education in those games. So when targeting different demographics, you're appealing to different sentiments. 8 to 11-year-olds, maybe you're downplaying the education a little bit so that you can target the 8 to 11-year-olds specifically, or maybe your game is just fun and there's not necessarily a didactic component to it. And then looking at genre preferences, we see a lot of the genres that are most popular, action, simulation, tend to be part of that general trend of mobile games and gamers, where we see action, arcade, strategy. Those games tend to be popular across the mobile market, across all mobile players. So they're sort of transforming into the general market, and understanding how to access that particular demographic is essential when you consider that you're shaping a gamer for the future that will have much more agency in terms of their own spending. So in the end, kids just want a fun game. And so when we look at the US, we see certain trends specifically in monetization, and we see this worldwide as well, but our focus for this study was just the US as we expand into other markets. Different markets function very differently, especially the farther out you go. So Eastern markets, in terms of the kids mobile market, is a very difficult market to understand. So we're going to focus today on the US. First, you understand, the differences between premium, free-to-play. So premium, you have games that are upfront game purchases, some of which have in-app purchases. And then free-to-play, you have in-app purchase free-to-play, but you also have subscription free-to-play, and then the advertising model. We're not going to cover the advertising model, but it tends to be very difficult to navigate for children because of regulations and COPA issues and so on. So specifically looking at in-app purchases and subscriptions, and the reason why we put subscriptions under free-to-play is because by and large subscription games are free-to-play at first, then you jump on for the subscription. So looking at the premium mobile market for the revenue that comes from kids, we see that upfront game purchases are, the largest piece of that pie. But then we see in-app purchases also contribute, about a half of the revenue that upfront purchases contribute. So these are kids that have already converted because they purchased a premium game, and then are, converting again. Whether or not they convert often, it depends on the game. But in general, we see in terms of upfront purchases, we see a general distribution that's close to each other with the different age groups. So about a third, about 40%, anywhere from 30 to 40% of kids across all of those age groups will buy upfront games. But when we look at in-app purchases, we see a large skew toward 10 to 13-year-olds. So over half of the revenue that you're seeing from premium in-app purchases across premium games are coming from that older demographic. And so there are certain pros and cons to the premium games model. So Clark Stacy actually just gave a wonderful presentation on this at Gamescom, so I can't, I have to credit him in helping me understand some of these different pros and cons. But basically, the pros are, you're largely dealing with COPA-friendly mechanics, which is very helpful considering how difficult they can be to navigate. It's a fairly transparent monetization model, so it's very popular with parents. They understand they're paying once, they can move on. The cons, though, are that you're receiving a limited revenue stream, and you're also going to probably see a short lifespan because there's not anything that's going to keep players continuously coming back in terms of upgrades. So unless you're Minecraft, that's probably the case. And it doesn't fund ongoing development and support necessarily. So trying to keep people, or trying to keep gamers engaged in your app when you're receiving a limited revenue stream is going to be really difficult. Now, the free-to-play market is the largest of the kids' revenue markets, but I'm going to break this down a little bit so you guys can see why this is not necessarily indicative of the general trend. So first, we do see a lot of growth. 11% growth year over year this year, 16% growth next 2016, and 8% growth the year after that. So we're still seeing some pretty respectable growth across the free-to-play model. But again, like I said, the older audiences are the ones who are the majority of these payers. So subscriptions are included in this. I will comment on them in just a couple slides. But first, to just break down the types of in-app purchases you see in free-to-play. You see consumables and content. And so consumables have the highest potential for spending, right? So, currencies or time extensions. But there's an ethical gray area there, and COPA regulations are heavy. And so it's highly regulated. And you're competing with larger studios that aren't kid-specific, but are targeting kids in, indirect or direct ways, even if they have a universal app. Content-based, however, like Disney episodes, you see that they're easier to follow regulations, they're transparent, but they can be hard to make money with, and they need constant content updates. So there are some pros and cons to that monetization model in terms of free-to-play. We're starting to see the growth of subscription apps in the marketplace. So in terms of subscriptions, as I mentioned, we see 75% of in-app purchases or free-to-play revenue coming from that older demographic, but when you whittle that down to just subscriptions, you're seeing that the majority of the, almost 80% of that revenue is coming from kids 9 and below. So subscriptions have been starting to become the choice monetization model for kids apps. So today, actually this morning, I looked up the top 10 grossing kids games in the US on iOS, and I was just really curious to see, what we see in terms of subscription and in terms of the different monetization models. So free-to-play in-app purchases, I just saw one, which was the episodes I mentioned. So consumables, not even there. It's just content-based. Premium without in-app purchases, I saw 3. I did not see any with in-app purchases. And then finally, subscription. So more than half of them were subscription. We're talking about top grossing, not most popular, not most downloaded, the ones that are making the most money. So we're starting to see this real upsurge in the subscription model, both in participation and in monetization. And because of the way that it's easier to navigate in terms of regulations and also provide a sense of security to parents, it's become more and more popular. As with any monetization, there are pros and cons. So the pro is that, as I mentioned, it's growing, it's transparent, and you receive predictable and recurring revenue. But the cons are that they can be hard to find on Google Play because they are not in the game section. There's less pricing flexibility. And there are some technical limitations in terms of building a server and so on, which can be difficult and pricey. So the outlook for the next 2-3 years to come is we see, first of all, as I mentioned, we see steady growth in the market, and we see a lot of this growth coming from these developed markets. So on the top, you see annual growth rate, with the orange being worldwide and the blue being US only. And we do see over the next year at least a huge boost in terms of growth. So we see a 15% growth rate for the US alone. Whereas worldwide, we're seeing some stagnation because of these developing markets. And then we're expecting the kids' mobile revenue market to grow to $2.2 billion by 2017, which is, not something to ignore. For sure, it's getting bigger and it's getting more prominent. And so if we break this down in terms of all of those different monetization models, as I mentioned, you see the general free-to-play in-app purchase monetization is the highest because we're talking about, children who are able to spend and spend more. But if you look at some of these other models, you see kid-specific free-to-play in-app purchase apps are somewhat, they're growing somewhat, but in some stagnation. And then subscriptions, we see quite a bit of growth. And then premium upfront, we see growth. However, with premium in-app purchases, we're seeing a decline, actually. So in 2017, we expect growth to actually be negative. So we expect that to contract in relation to these other models that are coming about that are much more popular and are allowing both kids and parents monetary confidence, rather, in terms of the way that they're spending. So as kids are cultivating their own agency, kids and their parents alike are going to find value in mobile games and become more confident in monetizing in these games the way that, they pay for toys or anything that's upfront monetization always. But part of that freedom comes with, an honesty and the perception of transparency and monetization. As such, we expect that the market will continue to adapt to this honest exchange and allow kids to thrive, kids games and kids monetization to continue to thrive and grow over the next few years. So thank you. Do you have any questions that I can answer?
Here, hang on just a second. We'll bring the mic to you.
The top 10 growing apps chart, was that based on downloads or revenue?
It was top grossing.
Top grossing. And then the last chart, right there. Are subscriptions predicted to decline? Because I thought you said it was growing on the previous.
The growth rate is expected to decline, as with, you know, any type of market, yeah, will eventually start to just kind of saturate.
Right.
But we still see significant growth. I think it's about 18% in 2017, year over year. So we're just seeing a boom over the next couple of years.